Hello everyone, I'm Alex the Hugmonger, and during MagicCon Las Vegas, I believe it was, Wizards of the Coast revealed plans for 4 pre-constructed decks releasing with Bloomburrow in August. One of them happens to be a Group Hug pre-constructed commander deck, and I thought what better opportunity is there than right now to go through the very short history of Group Hug pre-constructed commanders in Commander. Since the very first sort of pre-constructed release of Commander, hell, even before then, Group Hug has always been a part of the Commander sort of oeuvre, like the overall vibe of the thing, because it's always been about being able to play big splashy spells and do ridiculous things. And one of the rare sort of ridiculous things that you could do in kitchen table Magic that you couldn't do in competitive and you could do uniquely well in this burgeoning Commander format was do stuff that helps everybody, featuring cards like Howling Mine, Font of Mythos, Magus of the Vineyard, and Eldamari's Vineyard. You can give your opponents all sorts of fun, exciting stuff. And when Wizards of the Coast first released their very first Commander product, they actually included a sort of Group Hug Commander in with it. Before we go into the 3 pre-constructed decks, however, I want to give a quick shout out to Feldegriff. Feldegriff was one of Sheldon Menery's decks. This was indeed a Group Hug deck. Apparently, it ran a bit of a control theme to it, and its end goal, I think, was to give your opponent unlimited hippos. I'm not 100% sure. I actually haven't read through the deck list. I probably should do that at some point. We should probably, you know what, I think it'd be really fun to take a look through Sheldon Menery's Feldegriff deck and sort of goldfish out of it. I think that sounds like fun. But this was one of the decks that Sheldon Menery was sort of known for, the other, of course, being Ruhana the Formori, which we will get into later. But let's go ahead and start off at the very beginning with Zedru the Greathearted and the Political Puppets Precon. So Zedru the Greathearted let you give stuff away to your opponents, and then you would gain life and draw cards based on the amount of stuff your opponents owned or controlled but did not own. Or was it that you owned that they controlled? Either way, it gave you stuff for them having stuff that you owned. And this was the very first pre-constructed Commander decks for all of Commander. This was when when Wizards of the Coast first decided, hey, this whole Commander thing seems pretty cool. We're gonna make our own products for it. They do this for a lot of formats, but this was their first sort of go at Commander, and it gave us some of the coolest Commanders out there. We got Riku, we got Mimeoplasm, we got Zedru. These 3 are famous. We also got some less good ones. I'm not a fan of Kalia. I don't like her. She's whatever. This is the year where we started seeing reprints of Sol Ring and Felwar Stone, which before this point were fairly expensive. These were the first reprints of Sol Ring that had been seen in years. This was a tournament competitive card that cost $200, and this is where they started seeing major reprints. This may have been actually the first reprints of Sol Ring ever. Was there a Masterpiece before this? Jesus, I've been playing Magic too long. I have no idea. I don't remember. This is also where we started seeing the Vow cycle of spells. Vows are cards that give your opponent's cards buffs, but forces them to attack someone other than you. No, Vows don't force them to attack. They make it so that they can't attack you. So this would be a pacifism level effect if it's one-on-one, but obviously in multiplayer, well, you can't. You can always attack that guy. You can always attack the Kalia player. We all hate Kalia. We all hate Kalia at this table. The Vow cycle would go on to inspire the Impetus cycle of cards, and also like the world famous goad mechanic that everybody knows and loves. This is also where we first saw a printing of Chaos Warp, which I could have swore was from Alara, but actually looking back through the history of Chaos Warp, nope, it started out in this very precon. Amazing commander card, lets you shuffle any permanent, non-land permanent, any permanent, non-land permanent. We'll just say non-land permanent. If I'm wrong, it'll be on screen. It lets you shuffle any permanent into its owner's library. They'll flip the top card of their library, and if the flipped card is a permanent, you done goofed. So, along with Chaos Warp, Zedruu obviously needed some removal for problematic permanents that your opponents could control, and early on, one of the most problematic permanents your opponent could control would happen to be their commander. If they actually get Kalia of the Vast on the table, you need to get rid of her as fast as possible. Oblation would help you do this. For 1 white and 2, you would put a creature, permanent creature, we'll say creature this time, on the bottom of its owner's library, probably on the bottom this time, and they would draw 2 cards. This was what was known as the tuck rule. If your commander got put into your library, well, you just were tucked. You just had to deal with it. You couldn't move your commander to the command zone. Nowadays, however, you do have that option, but Oblation very early on was pretty good at getting rid of your opponent's commander for the entire game. Because once I put your commander to the bottom of your library, unless you've got a bunch of tutors or can draw through your entire deck pretty effectively, it's really, really hard to actually go and get your commander back. Ruhan of Vormori also first premiered in the Zedruu deck. This isn't a group hug card. He attacks a random person every turn. That's the opposite of group hug. However, Sheldon Menery, this was one of his most famous decks. That he referred to as "you did it to yourself." This was a deck that did a lot of redirect style effects, not just on spells but on damage and so on. So you would always end up being the one who kind of beat you out. A hilarious deck. Again, it'd be very nice to go over it at some point. This deck also contained Champion's Helm, Lightning Greaves, and Howling Mine. Howling Mine being a classic group hug card. This is a group hug card that even actually managed to see one competitive event, I think it was. You might notice that none of this really sounds like group hug, though. Just giving your opponent stuff, removing their stuff, so on. Of course, Howling Mine, classic group hug card. But you might actually come to notice that the Zedruu the Great-Hearted deck doesn't seem much like what we would commonly think of today as a group hug deck. This is because back in the day, well, Wizards of the Coast was still sort of coming out of its one-on-one competitive days, so any card that gave your opponent stuff is what people tended to think at the time of as group hug. That has changed a lot since then, and that in part came with the release of the Stalwart Unity pre-constructed deck featuring our Gay Kings, Kanaios and Tiro. These guys are amazing. They act as a Rites of Flourishing in your command zone. So every turn, at the end of a person's turn, I want to say at the end of their turn, everybody gets to draw a card, and you get to play an extra land somewhere, somehow. Someday we're going to make it, but not right. Anyway, this was a really, really fun deck. This was one of my personal pre-constructed decks that I got along the way because I've always loved the group hug sort of thing. This was one of the first reprints that we saw of Guafa Hazid in 7 years. This was a super fun and interesting group hug commander in his own right. Before the pre-constructed decks came out, this was one of my commanders. It was very cool to put a pacifism on an opponent's creature, but then they got to draw a card. It was really interesting to try to figure out, okay, how do I effectively lock down those creatures and keep them from swinging at me while, obviously trying to get them to swing at your opponents. This was also one of the first printings, probably the first printing? This was probably the first printing of Selfless Squire. One of those very much so, Fog Plus cards. This was a 4-mana Fog that is a, like, 1/1 or a 2/1, 2/2. It's one of those. And it gets +1/+1 counters equal to the total power of creatures that we're attacking. It's going to be right there, and I'm going to be wrong this whole time. It's either the number of creatures attacking or the total power of creatures attacking. It's hopefully the power of creatures attacking. That way I don't have to look dumb. This is a really cool Fog card. They have, of course, since printed some ridiculously powerful Fogs like Arachnogenesis, Ink Shield, and the Elf one, Elf Fog. This was also the first printing of Realm Seekers, which is not a particularly well-known commander card as far as I'm aware, but it's a uniquely interesting one in my mind. You see, this is a Group Hug payoff card that comes in to the battlefield with +1/+1 counters equal to the hand size of all players, and then you can pay some mana to remove a +1/+1 counter and go fetch a land. I'm going to be wrong again. I'm going with it. Edric Spymaster of Trest. This was also his first appearance. Notoriously busted commander in his own right. This was his last reprint. This wasn't his first printing, I don't believe. And he was banned as commander for a time. That used to be a rule, and I remember it was a really big deal to me. I was heartbroken because I was like, wait, but he's just my 2-mana guy. He's just a cool little dude, and when you guys punch each other, you get stuff for it. Why wouldn't you want to punch each other if I'm paying you to do so? Selvala, Explorer Returned, also appeared in the Kanaios and Tiro deck. This is one of the rare examples of a CEDH deck that actually is Group Hug, I've been told. It's a Group Hug deck where you twiddle Selvala to infinitely mill out your opponents as one of its strategies. Selvala is in the command zone. It's a CEDH deck. Competitive Group Hug. That's all I'm saying. Veteran Explorer and Humble Defector made their first appearance, I believe, here in the Kanaios and Tiros deck. Veteran Explorer is a 1-mana creature. When you ping him, when he dies, everybody gets to search for 2 lands. Amazing, amazing commander card. Always hilarious, and when Modern Horizons 3 comes out, Legacy players have already said this card is going in there for degenerate reasons. Humble Defector, you get to give him away in order to draw 2 cards. Hilarious commander card. I'm never been certain if he's got use outside of commander, but I would love to see it. This is the second ever printing of Sphere of Safety and Lurking Predators. Sphere of Safety is a enchantment payoff card that gives you a propaganda effect, so opponents have to pay mana in order to attack you, and this is equal to the number of enchantments you control. Lurking Predators says whenever your opponent casts a non-creature spell, you get to look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature, put it into play. I'm going to put the card on screen, and it's not going to say any of those words because I don't bother looking things up before I tell people them. While this deck didn't do many firsts, it really focused on Group Hug as a thing for the first time ever. Before this, Group Hug was Zedru or Fettelgriff or Owling Mine, which Owling Mine is one of my favorite competitive decks. It was Ebony Owl, Natsuke, combined with Howling Mine to try to keep your opponent having a bunch of cards in hand. And honestly, that is the funniest shit I've ever heard. I'm trying to figure out how to do Owling Mine in Pauper. It's not going well. Then we come to 2021, where we find ourselves staring down the barrel of the Silver Quill Statement. The Silver Quill Statement is the coolest shit imaginable. I absolutely love this deck. The Silver Quill Statement featured Brenna the Demagogue. And she has some complicated rules on her. Whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, if the opponent has more life than another one of your opponents, the attacking player draws a card, and you'll put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control. This is complexity creep at its finest, but you know what? She's also super cool and bird goth girl representation. I mean, come on, everybody. We need to represent the bird girl, goth girl, bird. Spooky goth girls are cool. So if I attack like player 3 and they have more life than either player 1 or 2, and I'm player 4, then I'll get to draw a card and put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature I control. It could be Brenna, it could be anyone. However, if you attack player 3 and you're player 2, because you're sitting across from me and I'm player 4, I don't know how numbers would work in this. And they have more life than either you or player 1, you're player 2, they're player 3, yeah, player 1, because I'm player 4 in this math. This was very well thought out. But you'll draw a card, and I'll put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature I control. She also has flying, which makes her an incredibly threatening group hug, both enabler and payoff, or at least a political one. This is the first printing ever of Nil's Discipline Enforcer and apparently Orzhov Advocist, both representing a new take on propaganda and pillow forting. You see, Nil's, at the end of your turn, puts a +1/+1 counter on one creature each player controls. That includes yourself and all of your opponents. And whenever somebody tries to attack you with a creature, they have to pay 1 for each +1/+1 counter on that creature. If you want a way to heck up Hawkbull, Nils is really good for it, because those merfolk, they get big fast, and the one way to stop them is by having Nils out there going, no, no, no. With Orzhov Advocist, this is actually, in my mind, a much more interesting take than Nils. Because at the end of your turn, beginning of your turn, it might be beginning of your turn, each of your opponents, or each player, may put +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. If they do, you gain protection from that player. No, that's noble heritage. They can't attack you. I'm pretty sure it's that second one. I'm almost certain. I'm not looking up the text. Again, we're raw dogging. No, we're not doing... Calligrapher also appeared in this deck. It incentivizes opponents to hit one another alongside, of course, Brenna herself, by giving all of them little inky dudes, little flyer boys, little small guys in the air who are made out of ink. Along with the set was the first printing of Secret Rendezvous, which is a really nice, efficient draw spell, but also like one of the earlier like explicit gay references. Kanios and Tira, obviously, and then you have Rawls, Zarek, and Tomic. I think his husband's name is Tomic. Whatever. It's important to me. It matters to me. Sorry. This is where they first introduced Demonstrate and Incarnation Technique. The Incarnation Technique was one of the 5 Demonstrate spells, and it could fill your graveyard and allow you to recur up to 2 creatures to your field as long as you let, or I might say force, your opponent to do so as well. Demonstrates a unique mechanic in Magic the Gathering, because when you cast a Demonstrate spell, you get to give an opponent 1 copy of the spell, and it will give you a 2nd copy of the spell. There's a lot of people online who will play against on spell table or something like that, who believe that the way Demonstrate works is it gives each of your opponents a copy, and while that would be very funny, that is not how this works. We will be going over that in a future video where I have to talk about it a lot, because I'm working on it. I'm making a Demonstrate based deck. If you've played against me, you'll know the deck. It's fantastic. I love it. It's my favorite. I love it. This set also brought back the offering cycle from like 7 years before. In this case, it brought back Infernal Offering and Benevolent Offering, with Infernal Offering being the only one worth talking about. You see, you and a player each sacrifice a creature. Each player who sacrifices a creature this way draws 2 cards, which is pretty nice. That's like an Altar's Reap for 5 mana, never mind. But you choose an opponent, return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, then that player does the same. Honestly, this was a fairly nifty card. This is a fairly nifty card still in my mind. However, it's been clearly outclassed by Neomshai Marad, which is effectively that second effect on a combat commander who I believe lacks evasion. I'm still working on a deck for Neomshai Marad because I swear she's good. She's good. She's very good. Really cool. Very, very good commander. This was the first ever printing of Ink Shield, which apparently I have heard was in part designed with the help of Sheldon Menery himself, and it was known to be one of his favorite cards out there, even getting a really beautiful reprint in Sheldon's spellbook, which has sold out by now. I meant to get this video out before then. I'm very good at this. The deck also had a pretty innovative board wipe in Promise of Loyalty, which let each player put a +1/+1 counter, or a loyalty counter, on a creature they control and then sacrifice all the rest of them. So everybody got to keep one thing, but that loyalty counter keeps them from attacking you, effectively giving them a vow. And that is all of the pre-constructed group hug commander decks out there leading up to Bloomborough. It seems to be about every 3 years that they'll release a new pre-constructed group hug deck, so this one comes just about on time. Honestly, I'm really excited to see what they do with this. This will be the first group hug precon deck in Fettlgriff colors or Bant colors. So I'm really interested to see what they do with Miss Bumbleflower and who like the backup commanders will be. It always, quite often in my mind, the sort of secondary commanders end up being a lot more interesting. We got that with the Fallout decks and the Master. The Master was a significantly cooler commander in my mind than Mothman, and I personally think that who's Liberty Prime. Liberty Prime is a better commander than Dr. Lee in that specific deck, just because of how it generates energy and so on. But if you are interested in more content from somebody who loves EDH, loves politics, group hug, all of that, hopefully this 20-minute video or whatever, 30-minute video, however long it ends up being, wasn't too much rambling for you.